Okay, so welcome everybody to the August briefing session in advance of the council meeting next week. As always, before we start, I want us to take a moment to just reflect upon the fact that our town's founded on the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and to pay our respects to the Noongar people, past, present and their elders in the future. So as you know, tonight is a briefing session, and the purpose of the briefing session is to assist council to make informed decisions. And I just want to remind councillors it's the opportunity to ask questions and to seek further information, not for decision making or sharing of opinions. Attendances and apologies. We've got Councillor Gangel on a leave of absence this evening. He'll be back next week for the council meeting. I believe there are other councillors who have leave of absences planned. We can't obviously approve them till next week, but maybe it would be good to just let us know what dates you're intending to be away.
So I'd like to request a leave of absence from the 1st of September to the 16th. 16th of September, yeah.
And Councillor Brown?
September 4 to 18 inclusive.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Deputations? Nothing?
Not any deputations.
Okay. Item 4, declarations of interest. I've got an proximity interest to item 6.2, which is the Success Hill parking issue. Any other declarations of interest? Addresses by members of the public. Is there anything that either of you would like to address council on? Just come to have a listen? It's nice to have your company. Okay, so moving on to reports. So 6.1, the red post box.
I have
Councillor Brown?
You understand rules?
No.
Obviously, once it becomes heritage listed, it has value. Is there any arrangements for some kind of security assessment? Somebody would come in the evening and take it and we look very good in somebody's man shed? Or alternatively, a staunchion should somebody come around the corner and smash it. Once it gets on the inventory, it has that. We have insurance for 1 Surrey Street, or the Pensioner Guard Cottage. That's my point. Do we have some kind of insurance against damage or theft?
I suppose, as the Chief Exec has mentioned, I don't think it becomes ours. It's not ours, and I would hope. But it's been standing there for all these years, and hopefully it would remain.
It's a working mailbox.
I understand. It becomes public knowledge that it has some value, and a lot of people don't know it's there, obviously. But once we start to publicise it, I wouldn't put it beyond people to take it away. So do we approach them and say, have you considered the security?
We can raise our concerns with Australia Post.
There you go.
It might be something to ask the Heritage Council during that meeting if somebody attends.
Yeah, okay.
Any further questions? Councillor Hamilton?
Yes, I note that point 3 of the officer's recommendation that you're suggesting a councillor representative to attend the Heritage Council meeting. Can I ask if there's any impediment to the community member who put this up for Heritage List, whether he should represent in any way?
My understanding that normally the request is for a councillor to attend, not a community.
Okay. The only reason I bring it up is because Jerry Coleman actually put in all the paperwork to have this registered. So I don't know if it's appropriate or community building to actually forward something to him. I'm not sure.
I suppose we could address that prior to the council meeting.
So make some inquiries. Yes. That would be appreciated. Thank you. Okay, everyone happy to move on to 6.2? Councillor Brown, do you want to come up? I've got any proximity interest? Any more questions?
Right, you're looking at page 6. Okay, do we have any questions? This is simple. Excuse me, off you go. Sprung in. Okay,
So,
seriously,
yes, thank you.
Councillor Quinton.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask whether we could put painting on the road as well, if that was considered.
Line marking?
Yeah.
The no parking signs or painting on the road, you can only have one or the other.
Yeah.
The white line, continuous white line down the middle, means that you can't park 3 metres on either side. So that's the law. So
Is that already there?
yeah, that's what, let's say we put no parking, or we can put the line down the middle. So the suggestion by our rangers is to put the no parking sign, to make it clear for people around the outside. Because it's a hammerhead, it's not a cul-de-sac, it's a hammerhead, which comes around and goes different. And therefore, they believe it is more beneficial to advising the residents of the no parking sign than having the white lines around.
Okay.
I think most people are aware that the bulb cul-de-sacs you can't park there, but hammerheads confuse people, and they're one of those problems for local governments where people actually think they're places where you can have 2 cars parked in the offshoots to the hammerhead. So,
Just a question: do we have recorded complaints about cars parking there?
We do.
Yes.
That's what this has come up for.
Okay, and so we put them in, and then we go through public education plan, and then some kind of enforcement.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you. No more questions? We happy? Thank you. Five.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, 6.3.
Yeah, I have a question regarding 6.3. I note that vandalism awareness signs are to the cost of $1,200. Is it possible that we could have something that meets the same objectives but could be a bit more less costly? Is that possible, or has it been investigated?
The signs were actually the size of the signs actually were a council resolution.
Yep.
If council want to go for a smaller sign.
And is it, I'm assuming, the sign and therefore the material that dictates the cost, rather than, obviously there's a graphic design on it as well, and there's probably elements of both that add to the cost?
Yeah, that's the cheapest cost we've got. So
Yeah.
if we go smaller, obviously,
Okay.
we're just following council's resolution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just thought it was worth mentioning, given, you know, clearly it's very important. Just thought I'd ask.
So can I just follow up on that question? So we've been talking as well about the new policy about street tree vandalism, and as part of that discussion there was a conversation about the current signs and the image and the large amount of text on there. Has there been any work started on redesigning those signs? The new design?
Under the policy that went to
Yep.
the
Town assets?
Yep. Town Asset Committee. Basically, that committee was wanting to reword that sign.
Okay.
So when that information finalises, we could actually do all the changes.
So it's
So maybe that
possible
could be
to,
time.
instead of using the current sign that we've been using, to hold off and get the new sign installed?
It is possible. It's up to council to say when you want it to.
What kind of timeline do you think we'd be looking at for the new design?
Well, we really can't do it to council
Adopts the...
adopts it. So it's basically, because the rewording is, you want it from the Asset Committee, we want to look at putting a reward in there as well.
Yeah.
So we'll get something designed up and put it back to council for the September meeting.
Sorry, I've got a couple more questions. So on the first page of the report, it says that in relation to this specific tree, that the town received a number of calls regarding possible line of sight issues. Was that from one individual, or was it from various?
And usually we do get the same argument from most people that have a sign in front of their house.
No, but this wasn't in relation to the sign, this was in relation to this particular tree, which then subsequently went on to be vandalised.
Yep. We viewed that. Yeah. I think it's mentioned in the report. We viewed it and there was no line of sight issue. So
my question is, was the individual who's been making these complaints, were they directly questioned about this tree?
By Ranger Services.
Okay. And so later on it goes to say that the outcome of the investigation was that there's no legal proof What's legal proof? What
Legal
definition are
proof
they
is
applying to
we
that?
can't identify who the person was in a way that we would get a result in court.
Mm-hmm.
At this stage, no one owned up, and we have no witnesses to the incident as well. So that's as far as we can go.
Okay, so the neighbours were questioned though as well?
Yes.
Okay, because just in the reports from the rangers, they seem to be incomplete, like some of those boxes weren't ticked, so it wasn't clear whether or not that had actually been done. Sorry, you had a question, Councillor Wilson?
I noticed there's a for sale sign out the front of the house where the tree is. I was just wondering if any building applications or crossover or demolition applications have been received in relation to the property that the trees are on.
I know at the time of the incident, when the questions from Ranger Services, there was no one in that property. It was vacant at the time. New people have moved into that property, whether they're leasing or only, I'm not too sure. But regarding crossover, planning would be the ones that
Okay.
might be able to identify.
Maybe if I can put that on notice then.
We'll address that.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
Just a question. I note that it says that there were no people living in that property, but in January, when I first notified the staff about this, there was definitely someone living in the property because he observed me taking photos of the tree and chose not to engage in any conversation with me. So that's kind of curious that there's, perhaps later on, there was no one living there when the staff finally went there, but that was interesting. The other thing too is I'm curious whether the arborist or staff realised that the second tree next to that one had also drill holes in it. There were actually two trees I took photos of, but no, obviously
No,
not.
no,
Okay. The other thing too is the main tree that was damaged. I did notice that the central trunk at some stage in the early months of summer was cut.
Yes.
Was that us or someone else? It was removed.
There was a part removed in the arborist time, so to remove that bit dangerous. But that was only one piece. I'm not too sure if it's the same one.
Yeah, it was the main central trunk up the centre, which was quite significant, but never mind, I wasn't sure who did that, so that's fine. That's about it.
So the other tree that was potentially vandalised, if that hasn't been assessed, is it worth us getting the staff to have a look at that to make sure that doesn't need any?
Yeah, just my observation is that the second tree doesn't show any signs of damage, so I'm not entirely sure. What I did when I went and took photos, I put my fingers into the holes and sniffed. So the first tree definitely had a product like petrol in it or something like that. The second tree looked like nothing had been put into it.
Okay.
Definitely drill holes, but nothing had been put into it.
Okay.
So,
Great, thank you. Councillor Quinton?
I just wanted to investigate further this legality issue. So when you say, should someone illegally remove, damage, prune or poison a tree, the town has in place a tree investigation form. At what point does it become a criminal investigation with the police?
If there's someone found to be, and we believe it's liable, we put another report back to council, and then it's up to the council to say whether we want to go to take a legal opinion.
Prosecution.
In that case, it'll come back to council in regards to that.
Right, which,
That's not at that position.
okay, because it sounds like a bit of a grey area in that we suspected someone, but we didn't follow that path. We didn't go down that path. Why didn't we do that with the police?
The police, I'm not too sure why we bring the police in. If we do our investigation, we can't believe it. Actually going to a police, I don't think they would follow up unless we have some sort of support for them to do. I could ask a question where police would want to get involved.
Could you? Because I'm wondering if there's anything we could add into the policy to strengthen it a bit more as some kind of deterrent, a criminal deterrent from people doing this, rather than it becoming the council's not going to do anything about it and then the cops aren't going to do anything about it. So,
Yeah.
Is this something you've ever raised?
If we had sufficient evidence to show that someone had criminally damaged, deliberately we could certainly report it to the police, and in fact our insurance company would want us to do so.
Well, so this is my question
yeah.
though. You don't need evidence to report someone. You just need to be suspicious, and police will investigate.
They might.
Well, yeah, but this is my point. At what point do we call the cops and say we are suspicious that this person didn't investigate, because we're not losing anything just by reporting it to the police?
We generally do report acts of vandalism and malicious damage.
Okay. How do we get it into our tree policy that we want further investigation into this kind of...
Well, I'm not sure it wasn't reported to police, but we'll have a look tomorrow and find out what happened.
Ace.
Was.
Okay. So, this is something we can explore in the policy.
Yes, the rangers generally provide me with a copy of the police report for malicious damage. I guess the toilets at Successor are a classic example.
It does sound like it would be something that's worthwhile doing routinely, just like if any other item of
As I
value was
say,
damaged.
I believe that in most cases it would have been done. I'm surprised it wasn't done. So.
Okay, thank you. Everybody?
Oh yes, I just do have another question. Does the policy have a reference to a communication strategy once we do decide to put a sign up at the tree?
Under the current council's policy, we put that tree up, we monitor it for put the sign up to advise residents, as you know, of what's happened. We monitor the tree for safe uses, and after a couple of years we get the arborist back to make sure the details are up, and so that sign stays there for 3 months period, a 3-year period, to advise residents in the area. No other communication or educational program is done, apart from we can mention it on the Facebook or on our webpage. We may investigate that possibility.
Yes.
So am I right in thinking that at the actual council meeting we will also have on the agenda the town app?
And the tree had returned to substantial health, and so the sign was removed.
And I put a paragraph in there on all the trees that have been damaged in the past, and given an update of where we are with them at the moment, and most of those are coming back to us.
Thanks, Ken. Councillor Brown?
Thank you. Do any other councils routinely involve police? South Perth have a particular problem with tree vandalism. It'd be worthwhile to see if they actually do routinely report it to police and have them come and conduct, in support of the rangers, a preliminary investigation, and include that in their policy. It actually upscales it a bit as far as people considering doing that damage, and then give it some publicity to say, as of this date, the policy has changed to say that we will report it to police and we will be asking them to investigate.
Yep.
It could have make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. And in the Rangers investigation form, that we can include a section in there that when the incident was reported to the police, and giving a job number, and if any information is received back, we can put it into that report.
Maybe we could strengthen it a bit. I don't know. But this is not quite as, from my reading, it's not quite as simple, a bit more complex than what we think. I could go to Mayor McLennan's house in the dead of night and destroy a tree at the front of her place.
But you would own up.
I would actually. I'm a stalker.
Your threat's on video now. So.
Okay, Councillor Brown, try and keep it to questions tonight if you can.
No, yeah, I won't get in that track.
Okay.
And my point is, there's malicious revenge and all those kind of things, and all of a sudden the property value of Mayor McLennan drops because there's a sign out the front for 3 years. I noticed Councillor Wilson said that the property's now for sale, and it was a rental. And there was no attempt to disguise the fact, unlike Wood Street, no attempt to disguise the fact it was drilled into. I think it was above ground. So who does that?
I think that was the question. Who does it? We would like to know that.
Someone who hates trees gets them.
Or somebody was seeking revenge. It could be. It's got to be considered, because everybody around this table was presuming guilt on the part of the people who own that property.
I'm not, can I just say?
No, okay, no, you didn't comment.
To not speak on my behalf.
Councillor Brown.
She's actually, our councillor, thank you, because you've warned me against it before, about including everybody else, but I got the feeling then the people around here were thinking, well, the owners of that house are guilty.
I think people would like to be able to have more evidence to be
Yeah.
certain.
That is really not my
Like the
fault.
property,
Can I
the value of
clarify
this-
for the record?
There you go. Thanks.
Okay, if it's a question, can you
I
ask?
apologise.
Otherwise, we'll move on.
No, well, I'll just make this stuff. Property value of that property is just plunged. Because we're going to put a big sign up at it.
Within the new vandalism policy that's been presented, there's a part in there that's been recommended to allow the CEO to contract out a private investigator or other things if they sees fit to do it, and that's be part of the council's decision.
So it was more the comment than question, and I do apologise to you. You warned me about it before I went to the girl. So don't scold me anymore.
All right, 6.4. This is the planning system that Mr. Dowling has prepared a response to us for. Any questions? Mr. Dowling and I had some conversations yesterday about the form-based coding that's referenced in there, which Design Basso has been discussing. Everybody happy?
When do we anticipate the Minister coming to a landing on this policy?
We haven't been informed of that yet, we don't know. What this will lead to is the production of a white paper, which will probably reflect the government's direction and trust that they want to take. So it could be causing this year is my best guess.
And seeing as we're in the process of looking at the town planning scheme, the documents related to that, is it possible that the outcome of this process might have significant impacts on the work we're doing to revise and update the town planning scheme?
Yeah, there was a proposal that, or a suggestion that local governments reviewing their strategy or scheme probably stop put a halt to it because the format and the content and nature of it may change. But I think the work.
If anything, didn't it imply that there were potentially more decision-making powers?
I think one of the was that the DAP Form 2, the minor reconsiderations could be delegated to the local government if the local government agreed with the proposal.
And some subdivisions?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
One subdivisions. So maybe, I don't know, 2, 3 subdivisions, that type.
Any further questions on this item? Okay. 6.5, the waiver of fees.
Good recycling program.
I just have a question around, so the staff are recommending to council that in future events such as this would potentially be waived and if they're eligible. I'm just a bit confused just because my understanding is that other than some of the regular bookings, a lot of our community facilities are booked by community groups. So what impact would that have on our revenue from our facilities?
I don't think it'll have substantial because it would replace the reports to council. So they don't come up very often for waiver of fees. But what I think Manager of Recreation and Culture is recommending is that a form be developed that would then go to People Services Committee as per the event sponsorship, so that we would have a form filled out and that it would go through the People Services Committee and to council in that form, rather than as a report directly to council as an officer report to council.
Right, so what do you see eligible organisations as being?
Probably no funded organisations would come to mind. The groups that have been supported by council in the past include the Red Cross. The Red Cross, any use of the facilities by Red Crosses, the council has waived fees for them. And so, yeah, organisations of that nature, but in the past it's come directly to council for a determination. And as with this case, the group has looked to use a facility for the second time in a year, which is quite uncommon that we would then be making a waiver for the one organisation possibly.
And can I just ask a question? You made a note in the report about that this group didn't have insurance. Was there an implication for the town
Under the casual hirers, they do have insurance with us. So casual hirers up to 10 times a year, the town carries insurance for those groups.
10 times a year.
Up to 10 times a year, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
In the report you use the word donate, not waive. So, which is a little bit confusing. So were they waived or were they donated?
It's waived.
Okay, so donate's the incorrect word in that?
Yes, that should be correct.
Right, okay. I also understand that this group, originally from what I read, indicated that they were going to do these things outdoors at reserves. So obviously that's changed, correct?
Well, they made the request to the town for December.
Okay.
Councillor Nikitchuk?
Yeah, and just following on from that, so, and apologise if I didn't hear correctly, so I hear that there might be a new procedure of going via people services and then to council, which, you know, sounds like a good way to withhold that, don't need my opinion. Would there then be more kind of some sort of written policy guidelines about then what could be waived, so it'd be like objective rather than kind of subjective and feel equitable for...
I think that's what point 2 of the recommendations implies.
Yeah, okay.
These are typically
My
one-off
apologies.
events for
Yep.
charitable purposes rather than a group that's all user. That's typically what we provided a waiver for. Some people have had a good idea to perform a community service and have asked us if they can do it.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Wilson?
Yes, so I'm just reading through the letter from Sue Thompson and the administration team.
And then to the west of that referred to the actual Sandy Beach Reserve. Yeah, and I know that we have through this process discussed what the other potential sites were and why they weren't feasible, and we may have explored this. Can I ask about the BIC and the regional nature of the playground and whether there was exploration and maybe what were the limitations of that site?
Can I say that a decision of council was to have the facility at Sandy Beach or near Sandy Beach?
Yep.
And that was about 2013 or 14 when Paul was involved. Paul was on council at the time.
Yep.
And I think that was when we chose to seek Lord Street and Chapman in lieu of Clark Way Reserve for the funding purposes. So we did focus our attention on Sandy Beach and or around Sandy Beach. So the 4 sites that were considered were at or around Sandy Beach. In Hamilton Street was one, further around Hardy Road, where the car park is off that area, was another site that was considered, and the other 2 sites were the preferred site and on Sandy Beach Reserve itself.
Yeah. And, you know, I know this may be controversial, but just say there was a deviation from it, and I'm saying this on the record because it's important to get a sense for how people's thoughts on it, and it is a forum to, you know, be able to ask questions. Would the BIC, in terms of size or scope, be something that could accommodate?
We're going to be master planning the BIC this financial year, so
Yep.
there's funding from council in the budget to achieve that.
Yeah.
At the moment, the BIC is probably broken into 3 aspects. At the moment, we've got the memorial and that aspect, the open space for the school and their recreation needs, their sports needs, and the private recreation spaces to the east. The footprint of the concept plan, as it has been prepared, is about 3,000 square metres, so it's a fairly significant footprint.
Yeah.
And so I suspect that we would be talking a smaller scale facility if we did consider it within the BIC.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just follow on from that question, because that's been brought up by some community members in recent times about that the centre of the town would benefit from having a playground. Can you just confirm that my understanding is correct, that there's never not been an intention to have a playground here as well. There have been two different projects, and the intention has been to have a playground in the centre, probably of a scale that would suit this location, as well as a playground down at Sandy Beach.
Yes, yes, so the playground implementation plan talks of a district level facility here.
Yeah, and can I just say that my questions are in the interest of good decision making, so he's also being able to feel comfortable about, you know, what else is happening, not necessarily a deviation. Thank you for answering my questions.
Councillor Hamilton?
In the officer's recommendation, you've got point 2, sets the project budget for 2019-20 budget at $1 million comprised of blah, blah, blah. Is it not correct that in the past this council has queried the administration about publishing figures, such concrete figures, in our agendas? I mean, we could have had up to $1 million, but we've got here at $1 million. Is this not sending out a message to to contractors or tender people that we are going to spend that amount of money?
The intent there is more about the designers, and the designers then to have a quantum on which to prepare the concept design. So if we were to say to the designers up to $1 million, they'll prepare it at $1 million rather than 900,000.
Is it possible then, so when this goes to council, if a decision is made about the budget, that aspect of the resolution is kept confidential? It can be communicated to the designers, but so that potential tenderers wouldn't be privy to that information?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it will be a competitive tender arrangement, and it will be a comprehensive tender, so there will be a detailed specifications will be associated with the tender, and we'll be asking the respondents to quote on each of the elements within that tender. So it will be a competitive process.
I have
Hamilton, and then I'll come to you.
Wouldn't there be a line item in the budget for that amount which would not be confidential?
There's been some discussion, I believe, with the Risk Committee recently about ways that might be able to be managed so that there was still information available to the public about what was being spent, but not necessarily the specific amount per project. Does that reflect the discussion?
I think that I would have been happy if it had said up to $1 million, but putting it at $1 million in our agenda documents, to me, sends out a message that
so your question for the staff is, in future, could
you actually investigate ways in which we can perhaps be a little bit more Yes.
Look, I'm happy to take that on and reflect that in.
I do have a subsequent question to that.
Okay, and then Councillor Wilson following.
Okay. I think it was the May meeting possibly, where I asked this council, the officers, whether we had regular contact with the government agencies about the potential of building on that land, which is Sandy Beach or Ashfield, whichever you'd like to talk about. And I was told that that conversation was regular and ongoing. So I'm somewhat surprised to see that the dialogue has changed a little bit. Is there a reason for that? Has something in the plans changed recently to get a different opinion, or was the dialogue engaging with the government departments not adequate?
So can I just, are you referring to the information that Mr Haggett sent through from Department of Water in the email as opposed to the reference in the agenda attachment?
Yes, it was in the email, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Correspondence was had with the Department of Swan River Trust in the old days, and they were very supportive of the concept, and they said it was in keeping with what they saw as relevant for that aspect of the Swan River fringe, and that they would support the town with an application. They also indicated that an application for development of under 500,000 could be administratively dealt with, but an application for a facility greater than 500,000 would require the Part 5, so which requires ministerial approval. So we've always been aware that that was a likely outcome, or that was the outcome that was required. They also gave us an example of a Part 5 application for a playground that they recently approved. So we had good examples of what to work from. Recently, or as a result of the resolution council in May, contact was made with the Department of Biodiversity to pursue the application and the dialogue, and there is a different officer now who's dealing with the application, and it appears he has a different interpretation to that which was provided to us originally.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. So at the attachments, at attachment 6 on the first page, there's a meeting note from the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions dated 17 July, and it's mentioned there that, and I quote, it was reiterated that DBCA is unlikely to support filling within the floodway. Does that mean that there was other advice prior to this meeting file note?
Prior to meeting face to face, we had email dialogue, and it was in that email dialogue that it was first mentioned, because he'd already received a copy of the concept plan, and he made mention at that point that Phil was going to be problematic from their perspective, or potentially problematic from their perspective.
Okay, and so when was that advice provided?
That was
originally?
The original advice that didn't include any consideration to Phil being an issue was in May 2017.
Okay.
And the advice, the more up-to-date advice, was in June or July, I think.
So may I get some clarification? So when you originally spoke to or had communication with the person that you emailed,
flooding, but with less fuel. And again, in the interest of good governance and decision making, just to understand these kind of subtleties.
can I just clarify your question? You said how would it be acceptable? Are you talking about to the department?
Yes,
Yep.
to the department,
Yep.
because obviously for the department there's flooding, there's concern about fuel, obviously proximity to the river. So I think from what I understand, you know, the sites are very close together, so those same issues would apply, and just about, you know, how would one site be more acceptable over the other, and about how levels of fuel were chosen initially.
Can I say that community members had been in contact with the officer ahead of the town? So he was aware of the project ahead of the town raising it with him, and he had also met on site with community members. So there was a fair amount of understanding of the community's concerns, as well as after we left, the town's position on the playground.
You mean recently? Like?
Yes, in July.
Oh, okay.
Yep. The Sandy Beach Reserve aspect is marginally higher land, so it would be a higher flood. It would be a bigger flood before it became an issue. Can I also say that the flood heights, as we know, have been adjusted and about a metre below where they previously were for 1% event. So the flood water on a 1% event at Sandy Beach would be shallower than it would be out in the reserve at the other aspect.
Yeah.
That would mean that the water flow would be marginally lower and slower, and that would therefore have less of an impact.
Yeah.
The likelihood of debris being washed up would be lower because of the amount of vegetation that exists on the reserve that would act as snags or snares that potentially would otherwise not be the case in the other side. And therefore the robustness of the facility would be less questioned on the reserve than it would be on the other aspect, or where it's currently planned.
Yeah.
Because the concern for biodiversity is the downstream debris as opposed to upstream water height issues and implications.
Okay.
And just a question about the modification of the design to have less fill, because my understanding was that some of the reason for that fill was because of the acid sulfate soils and the need to, obviously there were some elements of variety of height within the actual structure, but that the acid sulfate soils was a reason that had been given for the need to have such a large amount of fill previously?
To create some vertical elevation as part of the community consultation outcomes was that there was seen to be a high and the community wants some height, some vertical heights, and being able to tumble down and roll down. That was seen as positive. In terms of the acid sulfate soils, the instruction to the designers was that we couldn't cut in. Their original plan was to actually create a lagoon. They wanted to build they wanted to excavate the foreshore and create a beach. And we said, no, you can't go that way. So their solution was to create a mound and to put the play structure on a mound.
So the height was more in regards to just the desire for the kind of different levels of height rather than for, I mean, we know, and I've been privy to that flood study as well, that obviously since the life of the project, the flood heights have been reduced. So it's more a feature of trying to achieve those play elements rather than conservation or flooding concerns then?
Well, a bit of both. It meant that the timber structures on the top of the playground were then going to be elevated further and further removed in the event there was a flood.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Councillor Quinton.
Graham, I wanted to ask if we had done a kind of a master plan, because the letter points to some concerns for car parking and sewered toilets. So do we need to provide that to them? Is that something that they require now?
Yeah, it was something that we proposed in the draft budget that didn't get up. So if we were to go down that path, we would need to revisit it.
So what happens?
They've suggested it would be desirable.
Yeah.
I don't believe that it's crucial to that.
But have we asked that specific question? I mean, they've raised concerns about it. So what happens if we build the playground over on what we call the flats, and then the department, which they say is fine, but then turn around and say you can't build toilets over there, which is what we need to do and have been talking about since day dot, is putting toilets near the playground.
Yeah. So the department's also said that they're happy to work with us ongoing with this project to ensure that when the application for Part 5 does go in, it will meet their expectations. So that's why I don't believe necessarily that the concept plan for the overall reserve is that critical at this time.
Okay, because that was going to go to my next question, that if we had agreed to go to the design phase back in May, and this information has come up since, would we have had to revoke all of that and move it anyway?
No, because we would have engaged with the department anyway, so we were proposing to do that.
All right. So if we're deciding on a location, it's still going to go to a design phase. The department has a look at that, because they're still asking for more information that I assumed that we would already give them, like the drainage regime across the site, vegetation around the playground, all of that. So they still need all of this in order to make a decision about whether we can put the playground there anyway.
As part of Part 5 application, we'll have to demonstrate all of that.
Okay. All right. And so when's that going to happen?
Once we've got detailed design.
Okay. Right.
Which won't happen until we make a decision about location and budget.
Yeah. So can I just ask a question about budget then? Because I added up all of the figures and I got to 1.2. When we add up the 805 that we think we're going to get for the sale of the blocks and 238 from Inloo, and then 200 from Lotteries West is 1.2. So why aren't we talking about 1.2 as an overall figure, which also includes all of the bits and pieces as a master concept plan, rather than just saying we're going to build a playground for $1 million and then decide later on where all the other things are going to go?
Largely because the 805 is still not in the bank. It's believed to be reasonable or realistic, but it's not in the bank. As is the Lottery West grant, it's not in the bank. They're supportive. Lottery West is very supportive and say that they would welcome an application. We have, as you can see with this report, proposed that we reduce our expectations. They were talking 500,000 at one time, but as with the men's shed, we believe that 200 is going to be much more of a realistic ask, or gettable ask, and they've spoken favourably in that regard, but it's still not an approved grant. The application has yet to be made. I was erring on the side of conservatism, with 75% of the land sales being required to be invested in play structure. That gives us some scope for ancillary facilities there, or alternatively council could consider whether it needs to access the cash in lieu funds after all, and not utilise those in the event the Lottery West grant is received. But if the Lottery West grant is unsuccessful, then we are talking a budget of about 1.1.
Yeah, okay, so what I'm asking is down the track, can we have apples for apples? So we're going to have a whole master plan with the whole figure, or are we going to have bits and pieces with their own price tag?
Yeah, well, we've got we had, as I say, we had hoped to proceed with a master plan for the BIC as part of the budgeting process, and that was unsuccessful.
Right, and can I just ask about...
Sorry, with Sandy Beach, is that?
Yeah, I thought you meant that.
Good. Yeah, I was like really confused.
Reticulation of that area,
Yep.
and apparently the River Parks Committee are currently investigating, but it's not our land, so I understand that there's a management order would have to be put on it. Is the same kind of management order, is it, that we would put over there?
So Department for Lands have indicated their support for providing a management order for that aspect of the reserve, and they're just waiting for us to initiate that process.
So would that be reticulated?
At the moment it's not, obviously, and in summer it does dry out. If it was to become part of, if council did proceed with the vesting order and did formalise it as an off-lead area for dog exercise, then it could well be reticulated, as is the case at Sandy Beach Reserve now.
Okay, Councillor Hamilton, you have some questions?
Are you finished?
Yes, thank you.
May I ask why this matter over the last 6 months has not been presented to relevant committees? For instance, the River Parks Committee, obviously Sandy Beach is of interest to the River Parks Committee. Obviously there are state government representatives on that committee who could have given feedback over the last few months along with community members. I also believe that it could have come before the People Services Committee, which it did not. So can I ask why matters like this are not coming before the relevant committees prior to such expenditure, when we could be getting feedback before we go out and spend money on various plans?
Yes, that was a discussion had at the People Services Committee indeed. And can I say that I was blinkered to bringing it to council, but I recognise that, and I made comment at the Civil Services Committee, that was something that could have taken a different course, and I acknowledge that is the case. In terms of the River Parks Committee, I have been speaking with the Director of Operational Services, and we've talked about timing for a report to the committee. I believe there has been some updates provided to the committee by the Director of Operational Services on the process, but of course I don't attend that meeting.
Well, I'm talking about last 6 months we'd had opportunities.
I believe it has gone to committee in that time.
Yes.
I don't know.
I think in the time I've been on River Parks, I don't recall it came, although prior to becoming a councillor, I think it did. But anyway, I don't wish to,
I think, so I've had some discussion with the CEO about this this week, and I think there's a general desire amongst councillors, so whenever possible, a project that is under a particular committee, that it goes to that committee when it allows, like for example, such as the People Services Committee.
It used to always be an agenda item for the River Parks Committee.
yeah, it
this
did.
particular
It
project.
did come before the committee.
I've been going back through
me
the
being a
committee
councillor.
meeting minutes for this project to make myself much more familiar with it. And on all of the River Parks Committee meeting minutes and agendas that I've looked at, this was an agenda item. In fact, it was the River Parks Committee that recommended the plan to council for public consultation.
But it does seem that in the last 6 months or so,
Not in
that
the
has
last
been the
six
case.
It was in the past regularly
I
on that
agree.
committee.
Yeah.
In my time on River Parks, I don't recall this coming before the committee. That's since November.
No,
so-
you're right.
Yeah.
It was prior to
So-
that.
So I think the staff are aware that council would prefer, well, whenever possible, for it to go to the committee prior to coming to council. Councillor Wilson, sorry, had you finished? You have another question?
Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Wilson.
So just going back to the meeting note from the 17th of July from the Department of Biodiversity Conservation and Emissions, the advice that's given about necessary approvals and requirements that would need to be satisfied, is that just in relation to the proposed playground on the Bush Forever site, or would those conditions also apply if it was on the Sandy Beach Reserve site, which is managed by the town of Bassendean?
Yes. Yes, they would apply to both.
Okay.
I have a question about the toilets for this location. So we've budgeted to replace the toilets at Sandy Beach. I heard some whisperings that maybe it was originally planned to be sewer. There's some other proposals potentially at the moment. I'm also wondering about the location of those toilets and what the preferred location is.
Where we're at the moment is we're basically collecting the sewage from the location where it is on the far side of West Road. You come down. That was in the vicinity to halfway up. So if we move the locality where the toilets are now, we're moving about 100 metres upwards.
On the same side of the
Same
road, so
side.
on the Sandy Beach side, not on the Ashfield Flats side?
Ashfield side, yeah,
Yep.
because it's our area. But before we hit the trees, so we weren't interfering with any of the trees within the area, and had still access to the top and the bottom of the reserve. That was in the vicinity of something like $350,000 to be collected for sewage to those.
So that's the facility plus the connection, or that's
No,
just
it's
the
just the
connection?
Just the connection.
Just the connection.
So we've only allocated 250,000.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking at now, our alternative types of public toilets for those areas, to be in the budget, and a report will come back to council on when we identify that.
So if we were looking at an alternative
Just for sewage,
kind of
to
toilet, would there
bush.
be any implications about where would be suitable locations for it then?
Yeah, it would be in regards to the type of toilet. If it's a chemical, we'd have to increase the height and build the tanks underneath for the chemicals to react. So we'd be able to identify that. The location we identified at the moment, we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to lift limestone around, lift up the toilets.
So the same
people-
location you just
Yes.
mentioned, yeah?
So they're the type of things we're looking at. We're not that far away from presenting a report to council on the type of toilet and the location where we're suggesting to come back to council.
Okay, sorry to harp on about the toilets, but the other location where the current concept plan is designed around, would there be an impediment of having those toilets on the same side of the road as that?
Not if we do the build-up and how we do the same thing. It's more likely to be a chemical type of toilet. If that's the case, it's the same thing in principle applies, but we build it up and then put the containers underneath. Those containers then won't go fall out leak to the public or to the river. So those are the type of scenarios we're looking at. So it is a possibility we could put it on the other side. It is identified to put it on that side first, thinking that's where we could get the piping or pump the sewage from to the connection. Now it's more likely to be an alternative type of toilet, public toilet, we can put it on both sides because it's going to be stable in that area. So we'll be watching the space shortly.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you. The 100-year flood height, what is it, please?
4.82 metres.
The earliest recorded Swan River flooding was in 1830, when the river rose 6 metres. And the largest occurred in 1862, it was even bigger apparently, with 3 weeks of relentless heavy rain over the Swan River, including the causeway and over 2 metres of floodwaters for weeks. 4 people were reportedly killed. Properties and farms destroyed, the bridge over the Canning River was washed away. My point in saying is I chaired an emergency management committee and I've actually asked them to go back to the Batting Library and ask them to check the veracity of that. But 6 metres is lapping on my front door.
That occurred prior to the river mouth being dredged over.
I understand that. I understand the dynamics have changed. But since then, since that was changed, we have still had some catastrophic floods.
So what have you asked for it to be checked?
Well, the reason is, it was brought up earlier, that maybe we shouldn't be building an expensive structure so close to the river. And I do understand the dynamics of the river have changed, but that was extraordinary. And the one a few years later was even more extraordinary. So we're only a young colony before white settlers arrived in 1827. So if we ignore the lessons of the past, we could make some...
Those flood heights will happen again in Bassendean. It's not a matter of if, but when. But whether or not that is in the next 1,000 years is not known.
Or tomorrow,
Or
just
tomorrow.
3 weeks heavy rain. But I take Councillor Wilson's point.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, so I just had one last question. So, reading from the meeting note, it appears that the concern of the officers from the State Department related to the would those concerns exist, do you imagine, if the fill was replaced with a structure that was based on stilts instead?
No, I don't believe so. We would argue that the flood impact assessment report and the advice from the Department of Waters that they're comfortable that the facility is not going to create, with the fill, is not going to create any additional or significant additional encumbrance upstream, would be sufficient argument to prevail. However, the designer, if we were to retain it at the existing location, would likely modify the heights in order to reduce some of those concerns.
Councillor Hamilton?
Subsequent question, because of Councillor Wilson's question. I recall the consultant saying in a workshop that the reason we couldn't do treehouse style on the Ashfield flat side was because the trees weren't substantial enough. However, the trees on the Sandy Beach side are extraordinarily substantial, with very strong and very large trunk structures. So, following on from Councillor Wilson's comment or question, it seems to me that there is potential to explore treehouse style playground utilising the existing trees that are on site. Has that actually ever been explored with the rope type joining between the treehouse structures?
No, not at this stage. But can I say that we would certainly need to do an arborist report, because while the trees may appear safe and sound, there is known white ant activity in those trees, and we're not certain as to the robustness of them.
So it hasn't been explored?
Not at
Okay.
Okay. Any further questions?
Would likely would do.
Okay. 6.7, thank you, Mr. Haggett. The men's shed. Councillor Hamilton?
Okay. I actually do have quite a few questions on this particular one. So,
why don't you ask a few and then we can let somebody else ask the questions and come back to you?
Okay. I do recall in past meetings and what have you, there have been mentioned a few times that councillors would have a site visit, but that has actually never been organised. Is there a reason for that?
No, and in fact I believe there's been a request that we do have a site visit before next Tuesday, And so we were wondering whether Monday would suit council to have that site visit.
Okay, my next question is, the main motion is actually not accurately presented in this agenda, and I was wondering why. That's on page 33, so it's not a true reiteration of the actual main motion. So I'm curious about that, because obviously we rely on these documents to give us accurate...
Councillor Hampton, are you able to identify what the inaccuracy is specifically?
Okay, so let me go back to page 33. Yes. Okay, so basically the motion, the beginning of the motion, it only has the points, which is fine because the beginning of the motion was a rescind of a previous council resolution. Then part 2 says assist the Bassendean Magistrate to develop a business case to be submitted to council for review. That was actually in the motion supposed to be submitted to council by June. And I believe that the men's shed did provide information some many weeks or months ago. So I'm curious as to why we're only seeing that business case now.
I've got to say I apologise. I was unaware that there was a resolution for June. As you'd recall, I was away for much of the lead up and including the May council meeting. So I was in catch-up mode after I returned, and so that's something that did slip through. Yes, the men's shed did provide a draft of the business plan to council, to me, in time for the June meeting, but I was unaware that it was that time critical.
Okay. The correct wording of that motion is actually on the website in the minutes, so okay. The
was everything else accurate there?
Pretty much. Now, I've always advocated for the retention of the trees at the rear of the block. However, I'm surprised to see that there is option 1 where supposedly parking goes at the rear. I'm also surprised to know that the men's shed have been told that part of the hold-up was because I recommended parking at the rear of the men's shed, which I did not.
So can I just get some clarification? I don't believe any of the plans we've got here have got parking at the rear, do they?
Okay, it's in the in the quotation option 1 on page 34, it has here detailed design, site clearing, retaining walls, compaction, car park in brackets rear, and crossover driveway. So that's actually not a suggestion that came from myself. I want to make that clear.
Can I just comment on that? Certainly was the staff's understanding, and that was clarified with the men's shed, and that brackets, rear brackets, should have been removed as part of this report, because certainly, as you can see, the intent is not to car park.
Okay, so further on from that, I want to know if there has been exploration, because one of the suggestions I put forward some time ago was that we potentially look at angled footpath parking to reduce the footprint of parking on the actual land lot itself. Now I know that trees have been planted on that footpath now, that verge. So has there been any exploration of putting some parking, angled parking on the footpath?
On the verge?
On the verge. On the verge.
Brian can clarify, but the parking requirements are to be within the property.
It does normally.
So you're saying under the local planning scheme they're required?
Yes. Car parking would be on the side.
Okay, so we have a design basso conversation going on where we talk about being innovative, working with the parameters of the block of land to create things that are more attractive. So why is it difficult for us as a council to actually look outside the square? Is there potential to look at some things that may not have been done before, i.e. angle parking in the verge? Yes or
everybody can do
no?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So there is
Can I just
potential.
say my understanding that we've been given planning advice, trying to come up with a scheme that would meet the requirements of the scheme and is affordable.
Okay. Okay, so then this comes to a next point of planning in that there is a 3 metre from the boundary of the watercourt drain to the side of the shed. Now, I've been told that this is to do with requirements of building. However, the watercourt drain is never going to have a building of its own built on there. So I'm trying to comprehend why that building cannot be built up to the boundary line of the watercourt drain land. So, obviously that would provide a reiteration where you could, for instance, instead of having a 15 by 30 metre shed, you could have a 18 by 25 metre shed, which saves an enormous amount in fill at the rear of the block.
Okay, so let's get an answer to that question, then we'll give someone else the opportunity to
Yep.
answer.
My understanding, it's based on the advice of the building surveyor, because of the class of building it would be, it would need a 3 metre separation from the boundaries of the lot.
Was that a fire requirement or something like
Yes.
that? And so that's...
Sorry, I should explain it further. That's based on basically tin construction, as opposed to being brick construction where it would allow to be closer.
So this-
it's linked to the cost.
So even though the adjacent block is never going to have a structure built on it, that requirement is, there's no flexibility in it?
I'll take that on notice and see if we can address
Okay,
it.
thank you. Okay, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I support what Councillor Hamilton said. Surely we have the ability to have some flexibility in that 3 metre wasted space. As I said, there's no homes being built there. We can ensure that
Yeah, so
properties...
Mr Reid has said we'll follow that up
so
for
we'll do
us.
that.
Yep.
The other point was we went down a track at Surrey Street where we had consultants come in, didn't really consult anybody. Are we consulting the end users in the position of the place on the block?
My understanding is Mr Hargett's report that the men share the support of the office.
That's really important for us to know.
I think
we
Greg...
met with the shed
Today.
construction subcommittee,
And these designs are,
and the
positioning of the buildings are their preference?
The outcome of the meeting is, and their preferred preferences in the report.
Okay. That may change, can I say that may change if we can get some dispensation for that wasted 3 metre space, bring it down to 900mm, or indeed some kind of parallel wall to give more options and a different shape of building.
Certainly allow that if it was brick, that would be allowable. I would seek advice from Colin Short, our principal building surveyor. This shed, because it's on council control land, we cannot issue a building permit for it, or the certificate of design compliance will need to be done by a private building surveyor rather than...
Thank you. 3 metres, I just make a statement, 3 metres seems like a hell of a lot of wasted space.
Yep.
Configures the building so we've got to take out trees.
Yep.
We need to do something about that if we can.
Okay, so can I just, so we've got the 2 plans in the attachments. I'm not sure if everybody else followed, but the one, they're not really labelled clearly, but the one which has the car park close to the road with a shorter driveway is option 1, where the drain is relocated. And then the other plan where there's a longer driveway to the car park, that's representing option 2 and 3, depending on where the retaining wall at the rear of the property is located. Is that correct? No. So I had a discussion with Greg this afternoon and went and had a look at on site because obviously there are trees on this location and it would be preferable if we didn't have to remove trees if it's not necessary. My question relates to whether it's possible to, based on economics, option 1 has been given a lower priority in the report because it was more expensive with limited value added. But with the other one, we still have the car park set back and there's all this space here that gets wasted, which then means
Which
the
bit are
entire...
you pointing to?
So option 2 and 3, the second plan. So it's got the longer driveway and then it's got this space here at the front which is just vacant at this point.
Right.
So then that means everything is pushed back further on the site I was wondering whether it's possible for this car park on this option to be reconfigured so it moves everything a bit further forward, and potentially that might require less trees at the rear to be removed.
So the location of the shed site is contingent on being 2 metres to the rear of the drain at that point. So the building itself, the building envelope is constrained by the location of the drain.
Okay.
In these 2 options.
What about the fact, so if you have a look on, you don't have this, but where all the trees are on the property, if you don't want to push the actual shed back any further, but if you could reconfigure the parking lot so that it didn't go all the way to the boundary, we could save some of those trees on that side.
Yeah, look, I think the construction quote for the car park was based on square metres. I'm sure that can be reconfigured with similar cost estimates.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
When discussion about the men's shed was at the depot site, how many parking bays were we giving allocation for at that time?
Minimum 10, I think it was.
I think it's the same.
I think this one's been designed at 12.
It's got 14 on the plan, yeah, I think.
Can I say part of that was because we really anticipate that there would be community use of the facility, and that is likely to result in additional car parking requirements.
Is it the case that council often waives parking bay requirements for development applications that come before it?
We won't be considering this one though.
Councillor Hamilton?
One point.
Yes.
That the size of the car park is influenced slightly by you need to be able to get a track in, standard service vehicle, reverse and go out in forward gear. So that is, to some extent, I think you need an 8 metre aisle between the car park and base to make that work.
So that's in between there, you're saying?
Yep.
Councillor Hamilton, did you have further questions?
I'll leave the parking one now because everyone's had a comment about that. I was going to say something else, but I won't. There's no summary for the councillors in this report with the financial and lease obligations of the men's sheds. So how does this resemble the business plan sample that I provided to staff from the City of Vincent back in March or April, where very clearly the business case articulated what all the obligations were for all parties. This business case I'm looking at now, where staff were supposed to assist the men's shed in producing this business case, is very, well, it's vague on many points, and I'm curious about how we've got to this point now where we haven't got that information nailed down with an agreed terms and conditions between ourselves and the men's shed.
Basically, Councillor, because the instructions from last time was to determine whether or not the facility is viable at this site, and that's the basis of this report. Where we go with the lease and the business plan is to follow. That's the next process.
Well, we know that it's going to be a 450 metre shed, which is, I think, about right. It's a little bit more. The men would have been quite happy with a 400 square metre shed, but we know it's a 450 square metre shed. You've indicated in this report that you are basing it on the lease previously created by another council, which I have not had the time to read that. You did send me a copy. I haven't had a chance to read that.
Councillor Hamilton, can I suggest it's probably after this council meeting when a decision is made around some of these items, it would probably be timely for us to have a workshop and sit down and talk with the men's shed about a number of factors such as
that's a very good idea,
and the configuration of the building. Would that be?
That was the intention.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Are there any further questions? Okay, 6.8, local studies collection working group. I think a number of people have given feedback already to the staff on that. 6.9, festive season office closure. No. 6.10, audit and governance committee.
Sorry, I do have a question.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to clarify the staff, what the staff's acceptance to changing this. Are they all right with us wanting to have that extra day or not?
I think generally speaking, a lot of staff would like to have that day off. It's very rare that you get a day, Christmas Eve, it's a Monday, and a lot of staff would probably book holidays anyway.
Yeah, all right.
And I know other councils. Look, it's always a contentious issue, and the staff were aware that council might say, no, we want you to open anyway. But we would normally close at lunchtime on that day and have a function after. We're planning on having a fairly low-key sundowner on the Friday as a celebration, as the end of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If council is happy with that.
I just wanted to brief the intent to
So 6.10, audit and governance committee. So, Mr. Costarella, when I spoke to you yesterday about the purchasing policy, and I mentioned that the CEO and I had been just last week to a talk about sustainable procurement, and you were going to speak to Welder about our policy?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I did send an email to Alison, who was the lady who developed the policy, the sustainability policy. I've sent her a copy of our policy, and she promised me faithfully she'd get back to me before the council meeting. If there was any minor changes, we could still adopt the policy with the minor changes. If she believed, look, you know, it's probably something you really want to redesign, then we'll defer it back to the audit committee and redo another one based on the sustainability policy.
And just following on from that, so we've got the policy at the moment, and then there's also the, I'm not sure what you call it, the procedures that the staff follow. I would imagine if we're updating the policy, there'd also need to be an update to the procedures to reflect that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Would that happen?
Yeah.
Automatically?
Yeah.
Is that a question, Councillor Hamilton? No? Any further questions on that item? 6.10 still?
So is purchasing policy and procurement policy used interchangeably in this context, or are they two different?
One is a procedure and one's a policy. The procurement procedures are what the staff use to guide their procurement procedures. And the other one is a policy, a broader, this is what we're trying to achieve with our purchasing.
But for example, if we were to incorporate some of the principles that was discussed last week,
sure, and
especially around assessing tenders on some of those sustainable procurement items, it would require an updating of the procedure to reflect that. Yeah.
Yes, it would. And it's not just sustainable but ethical as well. So you would do some additional querying of the suppliers that you were seeking quotations from to make sure that you weren't purchasing T-shirts from someone around a sweatshop in Bangladesh or whatever, that sort of thing.
And they're commenting on that as well, are they?
I've sent them a copy of that as well, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, 6.11, the building surveyor. 6.12. Notices of motion, I believe we've had one from Councillor Mikachuk relating to weed management near the waterways, and one from Councillor Quinton relating to the road network priorities.
Yep.
There were no others?
No others received, no.
Okay, and in regards to item 8, the potential confidential business, I was a little bit uncertain as to why that was listed here under confidential, and I note that the staff has said it may come directly to council, but was this because there's legal advice associated with it?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any further?
Is the tape off?
It can be off. So we're closing the briefing session.
Well, theoretically we should shut the door if we're going to do something.
And move to go behind